Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Great old friend of the show, my guy Tom Haberstroh, NBA analyst. God, old habits die hard. I almost said ESPN NBA analyst, Tom. Like, that's how many times we used to talk back in the day. But Tom's doing great work now independently on his Substack page, including a piece that has definitely caught my attention, and I've kind of been thinking about, and really came to the forefront last night in this Bucks-Celtics game where there are 2 free throw attempts in the game in total. 0 by the Celtics, first time in NBA history. And Tom, you wrote at tomthefinder.com about how the NBA is going, like, wow, this scoring surge here that we're seeing is kind of nuts. Maybe we need to talk to the officials and change some things to bring it back into the realm. And here we are last night, maybe to a bit of an extreme. So first of all, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Great to be on, Craig, and appreciate the shout out. And we're OGs in this NBA beat. And I remember you almost probably said Heat Index. You were like, Tom Haberstroh from ESPN's Heat Index. Back in the day when I was covering LeBron every day, it was that was when I kind of broke into this thing and we met. So it feels like yesterday. But now at the Finder, I did that post, which was really, I was watching NBA games and noticing that the games were no longer in like the 130s, the 140s and 150s that we were seeing in November and December. And Luka had 73 points and Joel Embiid had 70 in the same week. And then all of a sudden, like, you didn't hear about that anymore, Craig. Like, it wasn't like, oh my God, the scoring in the NBA. And the reason was, and I had figured it out, is that shooting fouls and whistles were way down, and the scores were in the 90s and the 80s, and in some cases the 70s. And I was looking around, Craig, and I was like, what? Is it anyone not realizing that mid-season the NBA scoring environment has just collapsed? And so what I did was I looked into the numbers and I noticed that free throw attempts were way down 15, 20%. And usually you see that going up as the season goes on, or scoring goes up as the season goes on for a variety of reasons. But the trend was going in the opposite direction. And when I talk to teams and when I talk to coaches about it, they're like, whoa, we thought something was weird and something was different. And a lot of the plays that used to get a defensive foul were now sometimes a no call or going the other way, where the Trae Youngs, Luka Doncic's were going into the defender, kind of out of their way into the defender and throwing the ball up in the air. Those bang, bang plays were now being no calls, which wasn't happening earlier in the season. And it has this very large effect on scoring. And Craig, now that we're in like this gambling era, it had a huge impact on Vegas or betting lines too, is that the under was hitting on the totals over under. The under was hitting at like 70%. And so I had to write about it. And it was one of those things that, you write about hoping that you didn't miss something. And it seemed to catch fire, and it was a big story. And then the league, had to talk to the owners about it. But it was pretty wild. And now you're seeing like, this would never have happened, I don't think, in November and December. For this switch to happen mid-season is kind of crazy.
No, it's super wild. And I think there's kind of multiple discussions to have off of this, right? There's kind of the, hey, what happened? Like, why did this change happen? There's kind of the micro story. And then I think there's a fun, like, for two guys that love basketball, macro discussion of like whether this is good or bad for the game. Let's start off with like fleshing out the micro part of it. Like, was there a league memo? Was there like an officiating something? Was there a kind of point of inflection where something happened that changed this? Or did it just seem to happen over a very short amount of time?
Yeah, the NBA denies that there was any sort of decree sent out to the officials to change the way that they're officiating the game. And I get that. Like, they're smart, and it would make if there was some sort of documentation that the NBA was changing the rules on the fly, you would have heard about it. And the weird thing is about the NBA is that, they do run the officials. Like, the officials work for the NBA. They get their paychecks from the NBA. And so they have this thing called points of emphasis, where the boss of the leader of the NBA officiating, reminds the officials, and through these press releases and through these memos to teams, like re-emphasizing the important things that they're looking out for. And so they do have these kind of updates, monthly updates that they send out to teams and to reporters. However, what was happening was an extreme version of that. Like, there wasn't any sort of, in those memos, the points of emphasis memos to the teams, like, hey, we're gonna cut down on these calls by 40%. Like, we need to rein in on these things like significantly. It was just kind of like, hey, remember, this is a foul, this is not a foul, those sort of things. Pretty boring stuff. Now, this all came to a head, and there was a competition committee meeting in which this was addressed. And the NBA mentioned that there was an officiating focus. Whatever you want to read into, it's semantics, right?
Yeah.
Whether there was a decree or an officiating focus.
I wish I could be that focused at anything I do in my entire life.
Right. It was an officiating focus that they were trying to make sure that they were quote unquote consistent. And there was an ESPN podcast on the Low Post where Joe Dumars, who's the executive director of basketball operations for the NBA, the kind of rules czar, the punishment czar, colloquially, just that he is the guy who, when guys get suspended or fined, like, he's the one who sends that out or decides that. And they also had Monty McCutcheon on there, who's the head of refereeing for the NBA. And they dispelled the notion that there was any sort of decree, or that they, put their thumb on the scale and said, hey, we need to lower scoring. They deny that. But you can't, like they said on the pod, you can't argue with the numbers. The numbers are the numbers. And the facts are that in October and November and December, there were 46 free throws per game. In January, 46 free throws per game. Then in February, right around the time that Luka Doncic had 73 and Joel Embiid had 70, the bottom fell out. And in the month of February, the free throws went down to 40, which is it might not sound like a lot, but that, like, in the grand scheme of things, that is a significant change. And I actually asked a statistician about this. Like, it is statistically significant that something happened. It wasn't just random variation. And then in March, it went even further down to 39 free throws per game. And right now in April, it's about 40. So there was like a crazy Luka Doncic game like a few nights ago where there was, a crazy amount of free throws. But then last night there was 2. Right. And Craig, to just like further emphasize this point, there had never been a game in NBA history where there were fewer than 11 free throws, and there was 2 last night, okay, in that Bucks Celtics game, which was on national TV. And I'm going to run through the numbers here with you.
Okay.
In game 1 between these two teams, Milwaukee and Boston this year, there was 34 free throws. In game 2, there was 46. And then game 3 back in March, there was 43. Last night, there were 2. So it went from 34, 46, 43 to 2. Like,
I'm not a statistician. That feels statistically significant to me.
Yeah. I mean, my 7-year-old would say the same thing, right? So like, this is something's happening. And usually, like, when you talk to GMs and stuff, they say usually stuff happens in the off season, but it's happening in the mid season. And, maybe they're just introducing playoff style basketball like a month early to get teams ready. But again, Craig, this didn't happen in years past. This is new.
You're right. By the way, speaking of us being OGs, your kid's 7? I remember when your kid was born.
Yeah.
That's wild. Tom Haberstroh, old friend, is with us here on the Hoffman Show. If you want to read all of this data and read more about it, it's tomthefinder.com. It's his Substack. You definitely should check it out. So that kind of leads, Tom, to like the bigger macro discussion of like, what does this mean for the actual game and for the NBA product? I think those games that were in the 150s, like, yeah, they could be fun, but it was a little bit wild. And it's one thing if teams are going up and down, pace of play is higher, and there's a lot of contributing factors there. And that can be really fun if it truly is up and down basketball. But if it's just a constant parade to the free throw line, like, nobody wants to watch that. And I do think as an observer and as a basketball fan, like someone who plays, played pickup basketball, like, purist of the game,
there's no free throws in pickup basketball.
The swing
by the way,
and like all this stuff that, like, the manipulating the rules to draw free throws is crap. and I hated it. And it had got, and I was glad when like they eliminated the Durant sweep through and that play and some of these other like shot fakes. Let me jump into a guy. And you're right. Like when you play pickup, you don't do that stuff because you don't get rewarded for it. Like all you do is you get the ball and you already have the ball. So you might as well just keep playing. Like it doesn't feel like basketball in the sense of the sport. It feels like a manipulation of the rules to your competitive advantage, which like the point is to win. So congrats to you. But I do think that in general, I think about this a lot with some of the NFL rule changes too. The point of the rules is to create the spirit of the game in a way that you don't create like false rewards. It's the Cobra theory, right? If you reward people because you have a Cobra snake problem and you cut off the Cobra heads and you say, hey, every Cobra head you bring is worth $5. What actually you're incentivizing people to do is farm Cobras and then chop off their heads, which doesn't eliminate the Cobra problem.
I hadn't heard that one before. That's great.
It's from the Freakonomics authors, at least where I read it in their book.
Yeah.
But like the incentive structure was wrong is the point. And so I like this. I like that they are not incentivizing going to the free throw line. The free throw line should be there when a defender messes up, not when an offensive player just like bombards into someone. That's my like personal big macro take on this. How have you seen it?
Yeah, so there's a couple things here. One is the NBA was in that memo. They mentioned that it wasn't just officiating that caused the scoring decline. They had mentioned that also there was a decrease in a decline in pace.
Okay,
so this is what's really interesting to me. The NBA was arguing that the NBA scoring was down, yes, because of fewer foul calls being made, but there's also this thing called pace where the game was slowing down and therefore you're seeing lower scoring totals, right? The problem with that is that because free throws were down, pace was down. The causality is in the other direction, is that think about if you watch a game, a whistle happens on a scoring play, it artificially cuts that possession down. It shortens the possession, which means there's going to be more possessions. If you don't call a foul, the play goes on and then the possession lengthens and then you have fewer possessions in an overall game. So if you're calling fewer fouls, Craig, you're going to have a lower pace of play because the possessions are lasting longer. So it became like I was thinking about this. I was like, maybe I missed that. Maybe it is pace is actually just slowing down. This isn't about the foul calls. And then it was the foul calls were causing the increase in pace, or the fewer foul calls were decreasing the pace. So this was one of those cases where I just feel like something happened that like I don't know what exactly happened, and we'll probably never find out what form it took. But the idea that this was just a random variation, we already know that that's not possible. The idea that there was maybe a soft directive, like there's ways you can influence your entire officiating crews to like pay attention to certain things or to message certain things and have it be like, we've all worked in a workplace where the boss says something and you kind of know what they're getting at without the boss actually putting it in writing.
Right.
And so there's that.
Or even just like the way they're reviewed, right? If you're like, you get told a bunch of times, like, hey, you called that wrong, you're going to call it differently the next time. It's an almost instant fix.
Yeah. And L2Ms, like the last 2-minute reports, like you can get feedback on those things too. So there's also that. The other piece of it is 3-point shooting. And I want to mention this because it's important in the Celtics conversation last night, is that they took 52 threes. And we know that 3-pointers are less likely to be fouled on than a drive at the rim. So there is part of this a shot selection thing, but still, like the teams played 3 other times this year and they had free throw totals in the 30s and 40s, and yet we have 2. And in the last month, there have been a few games where there's 3 free throws, 4 free throws in a game, and it's an anomaly. And so I think fan-wise, I love it because it's the least exciting part of the game. And another thing, this era in basketball is actually the lowest number of free throws per possession in NBA. It's somewhere in the lower third of NBA history. So in general, we're having fewer free throws in today's game. The problem is now TV is so important, and the dollars and the negotiations with the media deals. I wrote about this, that it's kind of a soft pitch clock. I wrote about it on Tom the Finder, where the games are shorter now because they're not standing at the 3-point line. And I had a game last night where it was on Sunday, Celtics Blazers, that I was working. The game was over in like an hour and 45 minutes.
Ooh.
And it was a dream. It was amazing. Yeah. And I think that might be playing a part of it, whether it's kind of a results rather than the process. That the games are shorter, and I think it's a better viewing experience, just like in baseball, where if they're not just standing around, there's more action per minute of watching a game, and I think that's good.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. Do you think that there's been, we'll wrap up here with Tom Haberstroh, of course, great NBA writer and analyst with us here on the Hoffman Show. Is this the right spot, or is there like a sweet spot somewhere in the middle that you think is actually the right spot? Like, have they overcorrected here, or is this where it should be?
Yeah, well, you're seeing altercations, you're seeing physicality being, rewarded, and you just worry that games get out of hand. And so I think there is a happy medium between what we're seeing now and really in terms of what I think should happen. The messaging here, the communication to the teams is important, right? Like, if you're going to change the rules, you got to let the teams and players know, because the inside information that you could have and go monetize that, going to Vegas or going to your local sports book and betting on the unders. That's another piece of the story that I think people need to pay attention to, is like, yeah, I mean, should they have communicated it to teams a little better and message it to the teams? Maybe, but there's also the kind of inside information. If someone knows that the games are going to be called differently and that's not public information, you can act upon that in ways that is scary. So there's that. But again, do I think the NBA is controlling scoring through their officiating? I mean, it depends on what your definition of controlling is. The referees are being paid by the NBA, and they have points of emphasis and a lot of influence on games. And we're seeing that with the officiating and the free throw totals, is that it is much different scoring environment now than it was earlier this season.
Yeah, to be that dramatic, there's definitely something that has happened here. Just what? Well, we're never going to know, because that is the nature of this league. Tom Haberstroh, you can read him, tomthefinder.com, also contributing at Yahoo Sports, the Count the Dings podcast. So many great places you can find his basketball analysis. And I would assume, again, shortly here on the Hoffman Show, because it's playoff time. The NFL draft is finally going to clear off of our schedules, Tom, and it's going to be time to talk hoops, which means we're going to have you back on.
Yeah, and then if you want me on the football show, I do have a take that we should ban kickers. So,
oh wow! Now that if we have like a June topic list of like when we get real thin in radio world here,
you know how to find me.
Ban kickers, yeah. We're gonna write that one down.
Yeah,
Tom Haberstroh, everybody. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Craig.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.